The JSE trading higher, extending gains for the third session, mainly boosted by heavyweight resource-linked sectors along with financials and industrials. Viv Govender is the portfolio manager at Rand Swiss, and he joins us now for the latest market moves. Viv, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. The Rand was pressured in early trade, but looks to be faring better now. At least, what's driving moves there?
Yes, the Rand has been, seriously, significantly stronger rather, over the last, couple of weeks or so. That being said, we're trying to find a new range at the moment. I think some of the momentum towards strength has kind of dissipated after we get to about 1820. And so now we're about, say, 1870 or so. I think we're looking at international factors. The dollar stopped weakening, and that's one of the things that we saw come through in terms of Rand strength stopping. Also, I think we're waiting for some kind of feedback with regards to things like U.S. inflation to see the next move forward.
Let's take a look at the unemployment rate. You would have heard from the statistician general there, dropping somewhat. What stood out for you from the data?
Yeah, look, it's an improvement, over the worst. But that being said, we are still seeing, basically we had about 16.7 million people employed. 16.4 was the pre-pandemic level. But then you look at the fact that in the last quarter, the third quarter of 2023, we added 400 million people, 400,000 people. So basically, just the people in the last quarter that have been added to the workforce is larger than the total number of people added to employment since basically the start of the pandemic. So over the last 3 years or so, we've only added about 300,000 people, and in the last quarter, to employment that is, and in the last quarter there was 400,000 people basically adding to the workforce. So that obviously shows that things are still pretty bad, and especially for the young. The unemployment rate among young people in South Africa is quite substantial. It's virtually a majority of young people in this country are unemployed at the moment.
You speak of young people, and the statistician general, whenever this is announced, he speaks of that age band of between 15 and 24 being vulnerable, black females also being vulnerable to the labor market. And so how useful is this kind of data also when you take a look at the kinds of jobs, and whether it's permanent employment, temporary employment? Are we likely to see another uptick, slight as it may be, in the next quarter, or we likely to see jobs being shared?
I do think that the quality of jobs is important. We have a very bifurcated labor market in Africa. If you have a university degree in the right subject, your unemployment rate is comparable to first world levels, like the stuff you see in the US, the stuff you see in Europe, and so on. And if you are not in that group here, if you basically don't have a matric, your unemployment levels are catastrophic. Virtually the entire population, the majority of the population of people that don't have a matric are doomed, in fact, not to have a career going forward. And if you look at the South African stats here, about the number of kids that enter grade 1 versus the number of that graduate in 12 years' time with a matric exemption, that's the majority of children don't do that. So there's obviously a huge issue in this country. And the thing that people must understand as well is that unlike any other factor of production, something that goes into production, you can't really save labor. If somebody's 1 year of the 24 or the 25 or whatever it is lost, it's never going to be gotten back. You're never going to make up for that lost labor, lost productivity, lost potential that you lost to the country. So yeah, it's an incredibly difficult situation. The problem, I think, in South Africa is that we don't have a clear plan as to what to do about that. If you look at how countries elsewhere in the world have gotten out of the situation, it's through basically cheap manufacturing, large factories assembling products, that kind of stuff. The South African manufacturing sector is tiny compared to, for instance, the financial sector. The financial sector absorbs jobs, yes, absorbs people, but it absorbs very highly paid people with degrees. We need something that absorbs somebody that doesn't have a matric into the workforce, and that's something I think that the government needs to figure out a way to do, because the majority of people, like I said, the majority of kids are not coming out of, the 12 years of schooling with a matric certificate or going to university, and those are the people that we need to look at in terms of absorbing into the workforce.
Sure. How should we understand that more so when you hear the political speak now moving from nationalization to, what is this term that is being bandied about, where you actually do not export the raw material, beneficiation. So now the talk is beneficiation, right? So when you speak of manufacturing not being where it needs to be in South Africa, what has not allowed for beneficiation to be a thing in South Africa when we try and understand how it will become a thing in South Africa? to unlock jobs.
Infrastructure. How do you beneficiate your raw materials? We don't have electricity. You don't have the ability to transport stuff around the country because transit doesn't work. Those are the kind of issues you have as a problem. If you want to build a manufacturing base, you want to build an industrial base, you need to have transport, you need to have electricity, you need to have power, you need to have water in some cases, which we don't have in certain areas. That's stable enough. You can't go and build a factory when you don't know what the power supply looks like. Because obviously, power is a huge deal for a household. It's a bigger deal for a factory. Transport. Can you imagine not being able to get your goods to market or not being able to get your inputs to your factory because transport is not working properly? Those are the kind of things government can do that actually, helps do these things. But I mean, obviously, internationally, it's never been government that drives this stuff. Government can give you the base, but it has to be the private sector that drives things. And unfortunately, in South Africa, people look too often to government programs, government plans, as opposed to, private sector initiatives to get to where we need to get to. But like I said, I mean, you've got to understand, anyone that thinks about, for instance, an IT sector or a financial sector or so on, trying to get us out of the unemployment situation, then they must answer the question, what do you do with the people that don't have a matric certificate at the end of schooling? That is the majority almost of the children coming out of school. And those people need to be absorbed. And how do you absorb them? Historically, the only way to do that is basically manufacturing, lower-end manufacturing, things like assembling stuff, things like, garment design, garment production, and so on. Because that's what Asia did to get out of this, or get to the next step. And unfortunately, South Africa, we just don't have the infrastructure in place to get that done.
Because if the statistician general is worried about the age gap of 15 to 24, you take a look at the recently released census in terms of the population, the age population from 15 to 19, it's almost 5 million people. 20 to 24, that's 5,300,000 plus people. So you've almost got 10 million, if not more, actually, because if not more, you can check it out for yourself on the census, who are vulnerable in terms of unemployment. So what kind of a future is being built in the country? But let's take a look at Tech Resources. It's set to sell its coal business in a nearly $9 billion deal. What do we know about the specs of that deal?
Yeah, apparently this has been something that Glencore and Tech have been kind of hanging around. Apparently Glencore made an unsolicited bid, this is the hostile takeover kind of term. It's only hostile to the management, of course. Shareholders love hostile takeovers because you get to exit your company with a nice big premium. But yeah, this seems to be some kind of resolution around that particular, deal. Glencore apparently is taking about 77% of the operations for about $6.9 billion. Nippon Steel is getting in there for 20% at $1.7 billion. And I think there's Prosper as well is coming in for a 3% percentage of that deal. Look, I do think that this is obviously something that Glencore has been trying to do for a bit of time. So it is maybe a resolution to this particular conflict between the two management teams. Generally, when you do find the mergers happening, the seller ends up usually happier than the buyer down the line.
Let's take a look at Absa. It's on the verge of buying the Mauritian assets of HSBC for an undisclosed amount pending regulatory approval. What do we know about that deal?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is something I think that's very interesting here because Mauritius has risen quite quickly over the last couple of decades as a financial hub. They do dealings with India, they do dealings in South Africa as well. I mean, I think they try to position themselves as a kind of how can I say, like a little Switzerland or a little Singapore for the region, where, people do business dealings, or financial transactions on their island, but that they are based on economies in Africa or, for instance, in Asia, as opposed to being in Mauritius. So it's more like a financial sector as opposed to like an economic center. And it kind of makes sense for Absa to get a hold of that because obviously this Absa is dealing in the Africa region, and therefore they will want to have it hold if there's a new financial center being developed in Mauritius. It's about 38,000, I think, people here that are affected in terms of the amount of customers for the deal. Apparently HSBC is still looking at holding on to the larger, mid-sized companies and large corporates headquartered in Mauritius, like subsidiaries of international firms, etc. But this is going to affect, individuals, more than, like I said, the corporates and the larger companies.
Viv, thank you very much for your time on this Tuesday afternoon. Viv Govender is the portfolio manager at Rand Swiss.